so much. Welcome, everyone. I hope you had a restful lunch break, but not too restful. I'm here presenting on behalf of a wonderful team, the marvelous Megan Weber from Extension in Macerk. We've been supported by Brock Ballman, a conservation student, a conservation science graduate student. We're also grateful to Macerk for our funding and for an amazing advisory group from state, county, and nonprofit organizations. Similarly, we couldn't do this work without the dedicated students and volunteers who helped us observe anglers and who've provided perspective on our Beyond the Sign project. So signs are viewed as very useful for sharing messages, as you can imagine. It's clear that signs are relatively low cost compared to other ways to communicate, durable with staying power, and relatively easy to change out if and as needed. They're also seemingly simple to create. As such, they are really a go-to for information and educational opportunity. So what's the need to go beyond a sign? Well, certainly signs may be enough to do information and educate people. However, as our communications become increasingly advanced with technology and we continue into our virtual century, we wondered if the signs were enough to impact visitors and their behaviors. If and how might more dynamic content impact visitors and their behavior? Would it be worth the investment to make a change? Did it make a difference? Thus, we crafted a proposal to examine this question in relation to preventative behaviors for aquatic invasive species, or AIS. And today, we're reporting on the first of 3 data collection phases in this project, observing angler behaviors to inform prevention message development. This project, we focused on public boat launches to inform the message development. So anglers are an important part of the outdoor recreation landscape, both in the United States and Minnesota. In the US, outdoor recreation participation increased significantly during the COVID onset. And according to the Outdoor Industry Association, 80% of outdoor activities experienced participation growth in 2022, including water-based activities like fishing and boating. It's important to note that the outdoor recreation new participant base became more diverse in 2022 as well, with participation increases among those who identify as Black, Hispanic, and LGBTQ+. Fishing is of particular interest for this project, and recent works from the Outdoor Industry Association indicate a national increase from 21 to 2022 in fishing, 4%. Perhaps important for AIS prevention behavior performance and messaging, only 18% of anglers reported fishing alone. Also, as we consider future educational and informational opportunities, it's important to note that, like outdoor recreation overall, new anglers are younger, more diverse, and highly socially connected. In our land of 10,000 lakes and wonderful rivers, Minnesotans enjoy water-based recreation, including boating and fishing. And in fact, Minnesota was identified as having the 5th highest expenditure on boating in the US just recently. About a fourth of Minnesotans have purchased a fishing license in 2016. And participation has declined from 2011 to 2016 by about 5%, with fishing sale licenses in 2022 were down to an estimated 1.1 million people purchasing them. And in Minnesota, like at the national level, male anglers do continue to make up the majority of the Minnesota anglers, but females comprise almost a third. Boating and fishing often go together, and a 2020 Minnesota Recreational Boat Owner Survey revealed that the majority of boat owners do fish. They use their motorized boat at a public boat launch and most frequently have been on 2 or more water bodies in the last season. Also, it's just important to note that not all boat owners are motorized owners. About 10% of those surveyed did not own a motorized boat. While recreation has many personal, social, and economic benefits, it's also a leading pathway for the spread of invasive species. And a pathway is a way to, that invasive species are introduced into new environments. In terms of aquatic invasive species, anglers who fish from a boat, or AFABs, as we've called them, have been identified as a priority AIS pathway in Minnesota, as plants and animals may spread through boat and equipment movement. The prevention of this movement is arguably the most important effort to minimize invasive species impacts. So, Minnesota statutes requires boaters and anglers protect waters from AIS by one, cleaning all visible aquatic plants, mussels, and other species from watercraft, trailers, and water-related equipment, and two, draining water-related equipment, including the drain bilge, live well, and bait well by removing drain plugs and keeping them out while transporting watercraft. These rules are communicated to boaters and anglers in a variety of ways. For example, anglers encounter prevention messages throughout their recreation experience. Before they fish, they get a fishing license with regulations, including information about AIS. As they travel to fish, they may encounter a billboard or informational sign about AIS. And at the launch or boat rental location, they encounter any number of signs. And when they land, they might see these same signs if they come back to the same landing. Now, self-reported AIS knowledge and awareness is generally high, according to a 2020 DNR report, where 80% indicated extreme familiarity with them. Similarly, attitudes and self-reported prevention behaviors are relatively high. When asked, nearly 80% of Minnesota boaters indicate they always inspect their boat and trailer and remove vegetation. Now, because Minnesotans are often above average, this is a bit higher than the Great Lakes region, where about half of those anglers reported they always removed any visible mud, plants, fish, or animals before transporting fishing or boating equipment. It's also a bit higher than the Illinois anglers recently studied, of which, again, 2/3 reported taking all the recommended actions that boat to clean a boat interior, boat exterior. However, and important as we move ahead through these observations, less than half reported taking all the recommended actions on their fishing tackle. In Minnesota, related to draining, about 80% of Minnesota boaters indicate they always remove their drain plug. However, when observed, boaters appear to comply with some, but not all, of the required preventative behaviors. Oops, excuse me. Specifically, Fortune observed 142 watercraft at a standard access, and 29% didn't inspect their boats. In addition, in Hennepin County, where he observed more than 400 fishing boats, 21% violated Minnesota statute by leaving with vegetation on the boat or trailer or entering or leaving with a plug-in. Now, in contrast, Minnesota AIS inspectors report 97% of boaters arrived with their drain plug out. So importantly, inspectors were not at all the landings where Fortin observed. Delving deeper into this observation behavior, University of Minnesota researcher Nicole Angel challenged anglers to find AIS on a staged boat. She had placed several aquatic invasive species on a boat and were asked people to find them. When asked to do what they normally do, fewer than 40% of boaters found a zebra mussel on the hull, and only 3% found a zebra mussel on a motor mount, and no one found the spiny water flea on a fishing rod. These results support a Minnesota survey that found more than 50% of anglers do not believe that angling gear can move aquatic invasive species among water bodies. Also in Nicole's study, participants most frequently overlooked the winch, the bowline, the transducer, and tow rope. They frequently looked at, but didn't touch, the trailer axe rollers and transom well. So anglers are aware, informed, and completing some, but not all, of the required behaviors. Thus, despite well-intended and widespread efforts to influence preventative behaviors across pathways, Minnesota waterways remain at high risk from aquatic invasive species. A 2019 DNR report rightly suggested there's a gap between anglers having the right attitude and doing the right thing. Bridging this knowledge action gap is paramount. Now, in terms of getting them to do the right thing, boaters indicate they prefer on-site messaging, but only 34% indicated signage would motivate them to clean and dry their boats. Further, attention to signage remains low. For example, At select Minnesota boat landings, fewer than 3% of boaters were observed reading signs, with an average of 12% glancing at related signage. This finding reflects other sign-related research where a range of reading signs existed, reading types and levels existed among visitors, and reading time was about 30 seconds. Fortin did find that a year after the addition of improved signage, those observed glancing at signage did in fact increase. So what to do? Think beyond the sign? Research reveals that the more engaging information is, more likely it is to influence and potentially change behavioral intentions because the receiver can elaborate on the information provided. This elaboration likelihood model is a widely used communication theory and posits two routes to persuasion, the peripheral and the central. While the peripheral route requires little processing, it typically induces only short-term changes. In contrast, the central route processing requires increased cognitive effort and relies primarily on the message content versus external contextual cues. While both routes can lead to behavior change, messages processed through the central route typically lead to attitudes that are more indicative of future behaviors, are more persistent over time, and preferred. This central route processing occurs when the ability or motivation to elaborate on a message is high, resulting in recipients using prior knowledge and issue-relevant thoughts to carefully review the content of an argument. Persuasion arising from the central route often has a longer lasting attitude and impact and stronger resistance to counter persuasion. So ELM messaging has been successfully applied in a recreation context to increase environmentally friendly behavior, intentions to pick up litter, and generally preferred park behaviors, as well as develop select safety and AIS messaging. Now, signs can certainly garner attention. Davis summarized in 2019 that signs can contain multisensory features and engage the senses of hearing, smelling, and touch to increase attention. And that a combination of words and images, rather than just all text, makes signs more meaningful and memorable. Still, static environmental scenes elicit lower responses than dynamic ones. Beyond signs, immersion elevates the emotional impact of a message and users' attitudes toward a message. Adopted extensively in other industries, advanced information communication technologies like augmented reality offer significant opportunities to outdoor recreation and nature-based tourism. Augmented reality is just that. It augments or adds to reality. Digital information is added to the world we're already in, like Pokemon Go, perhaps is the best example that you might know, but AR can be as simple as adding hats to a Zoom meeting that we're in, or clothes. Milgram defined augmented reality as any case in which an otherwise real environment is augmented by virtual environments. You might also hear terms like mixed reality as well. Once connected with a QR or similar code, users can interact with virtual images in a real-world context through enhanced computer-generated sensory inputs such as audio, video, and other graphics. For example, AR has elevated tourism experiences and produced more positive attitudes about a destination. In the last decade, augmented reality has been employed to create AIS-related games, but applications to influence AIS prevention behaviors weren't found in a recent literature search, with the exception of a small-scale effort right here in Minnesota in St. Louis County. With that work, a group developed augmented reality enhanced access signage throughout St. Louis County to complement the current research or outreach messaging that's happening there. And while ambitious efforts were made to contact folks and initial engagement was what they expected, the downloads and use of the actual app were much lower than they expected. So, toward increasing our knowledge about going beyond the sign and into the advanced communication technology territory, the purpose of this project is to test novel, engaging educational message mediums to advance effective AIS prevention and increase intentions to perform preventative behaviors among anglers who use a fished boat, or anglers who use boats to fish, AFABs. So our question was, if and how do increasingly engaging message mediums impact behavioral tensions among AFABs? Our study process involved 5 main areas: systematic observation to compare AFAB behavior with preventative behaviors to reduce AIS spread among the AFABs, and focus groups to explore those behaviors with AFABs, message development and visualization for both static and augmented reality formats, and then testing those messages on intentions to perform the required prevention behaviors at public landings among AFABs, then sharing the results and best practices. Our hypotheses are that as educational message medium increases, intentions to perform the AIS prevention behaviors will also increase. Based on our findings, the team will develop and disseminate recommendations for the most effective messaging in concert with our new and existing partners. As a result, we hope that statewide AIS communication efforts will be more informed and effective to measurably reduce AIS spread. Subsequently, both the natural and economic engines our waterways represent will be better protected. But to get that far, let's get back to our observations. So, our systematic observation process included a literature review and observational tool review this winter, development and testing of an observation protocol, observing anglers who fish from a boat, and now analysis and reporting. We're just in the initial stages of that. So, based on previous research and partner insights, we developed a systematic observational form and pre-tested it to assess if and how anglers are performing the AIS prevention behaviors as they exit select waterways. We were specifically interested in behaviors related to the Minnesota state statutes, such as leaving access with vegetation on the boat or trailer, water drainage from equipment, and leaving access with the drain plug in or other devices removed and opened. This is an example of the observation form. You can see where we have different parts of the boat and equipment that we're looking at, and then assessing if there is visible vegetation. If it is, was all of it removed, some of it removed, or are we uncertain? Similarly, we assessed much of this in terms of if they touched, looked, or didn't look at the elements. We also, as they left, identified if they'd removed the drain plug and if we saw any vegetation as they left. Our site was in Minnesota, and it was quite a site selection process, which I'm very grateful to Megan Weber and all the work that she did on this. We were working in Minnesota. We used this protocol at 4 sites, 2 metro and 2 greater Minnesota lakes that were as comparable as possible, determined in consultation with the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources and other partners. We honed in on AIS infestation status, sites with minimal signage, sites that didn't have watercraft inspectors and ambassadors, sites that didn't have cleaning tools and stations, and we hope for no additional signage beyond this. We also looked at use levels and launch design and any other factors deemed essential. Our 2 metro lakes were in Anoka County, and you can see them here, Lake Peltier and Centerville. Both have Eurasian milfoil infestation and were infested within 3 years of each other. Both of the launches are paved. These lakes have similar sizes and depth, but Peltier has twice the number of shoreline miles. Our greater Minnesota lakes were in Douglas County, and congratulations to Justin on his award. We were at Lake Ida and Reno Lake, going about 140 miles from the metro. Both have zebra mussels and were infested within 1 year of each other. These lakes are similar sizes, but Ida is much deeper and has almost twice as much shoreline as Reno. Trained observers inconspicuously observed boating anglers' behaviors at these sites. So upon arrival, observers attempted to seamlessly enter into the setting, fitting in as someone who might be waiting for a boat to pick them up, or a person enjoying the area, just nature observing. They observed the first boat to land, remaining as flexible and nimble as they could to ensure the best possible views of the selected boaters and their behaviors during exits. Once the boating party was complete with their exit, the observer waited for the next AFAB party to come off the lake. We created a sampling plan to address monthly, weekly, and daily use periods detailed by actual or estimated use. And we were out there from 8 a.m. to sunset with 4-hour sampling periods spread throughout the summer. I do want to note that we were hampered a bit by the heat and air quality issues. We certainly did not put our people out in unsafe situations and hope and assume there were not too many AFABs out there anyway. Again, we were interested in these cleaning and draining behaviors. We did simple descriptive statistics at this point, and I want to note that we focused our analysis on the observations we were confident on. You saw that we had our observations were yes, no, unsure. So for the analysis about the cleaning and draining, we removed the unsure. So we're quite confident in those that we have. In total, we observed 193 vessels across the 4 lakes. You can see that we had more observations in the metro where we had paid observers. Our minimum observations that we wanted was 30, so we made that. And at Peltier, we were there for 15 observation periods, 62 hours, and saw 66 vessels. At Centerville, 11 observation periods, 44 hours, and 57 vessels, so maybe a little busier there. At Reno and Ida, we had 7 and 8 observation periods, about 32 and 28 hours, and saw between 30 and 40 vessels. Our observations were dominated by motorized fishing boats, of which about 1/5 left with visible vegetation, and 1/4 did not remove the drain plug. Now, this does not include pontoons because that rule doesn't apply to them. The majority were not removing vegetation from their motors or mounts, but more were removing from their hull, trailer, and propellers. So you can see that this figure 6 is the percent not removing the vegetation from these select boat sections among our confident observations. The majority were not touching boat sections, only looking. So this is, you can see that there's some consistency on the trailer where there's about equal proportions not touching and not looking. But in the other, more people are actually looking but not touching, which becomes an issue. So in some, the majority are not touching or removing vegetation, but they just are looking. This graph combines them all by the area that we were observing. Now, when we look at equipment, the majority were not seen cleaning fishing lines or coolers, but more were cleaning their poles and nets. And I want to emphasize that they were not seen doing this at the landing. And we were curious and we think about, oh, we wonder if they're doing this as they come into land. And that's something we need to explore more. But we certainly didn't see them doing anything when they landed. When we get to the draining behaviors, the majority were not seen draining their wells or buckets, but more motors were drained at exit. And again, that 26% of people not removing the drain plug. We did time how long people spent at the launch, and the average time spent there was about 7.6 minutes. You can see this distribution where most frequently they spent 2 to 6 minutes as they pulled out their boat and then they left. There's quite a range. And when we Windsorize the data or bring it down to maybe that 16, 15, 16 point, the average time doesn't change that much because there's just a few parties there who were spending a little extra time chasing their kids or whatever. They weren't just cleaning at that period. Well, so what, you might ask? So we have a few thoughts for consideration about the so what on this. So first off, we are wondering about the acceptability of these violations. Between 20 and 25% are not complying with the laws. Is that acceptable? I'm sure ideally compliance would be 100%, but what is realistic and possible? And certainly these aren't questions I can answer, but I put forward to the managers and administrators and perhaps even the public in terms of what's acceptable for this. There is some big picture consistency of the observations and what boaters and anglers report that they do. So for example, 78% indicated that they always inspect and remove vegetation, which is very similar to our observations of those leaving with visible vegetation. And 80% indicate they always remove the drain plug. However, we observed fewer than that, about 74%. Our observational findings are a bit lower compared to some of the other regional findings, and so pros and similarities and differences to some of the past work. Recall Great Lake anglers reported they're likely to drain all their water holding compartments. We certainly didn't see that. And 68% of Illinois anglers report they clean their boat and exterior, and we didn't see all of that. Our leaving with visible vegetation is lower than a 2010 Wisconsin-Michigan study, where 63% of boats had vegetation attached. But I think the time difference and messaging changes in that decade might contribute to that difference. Certainly, it seems we need to get people to touch more surfaces. Looking is good, but touching is really essential, especially for the zebra mussel. We observed boaters were more frequently touching many boat parts, we're looking at rather than touching many boat parts. I'm just bringing back this graph. So you see that the dark red is they're not removing vegetation, and the lighter red is they're not touching those parts. Well, to get zebra mussels, you need to touch those parts and other things as well. And as a reminder, Angel's work revealed similar overlooked areas, such as the motor mount and the lower unit. Now, I don't think we can blame COVID on the lack of touching, but it is curious and definitely an opportunity. Equipment cleaning is also an opportunity. In terms of equipment, we did not see a lot of cleaning. As I mentioned, some of it may have been that they were at the exit and people had cleaned things as they were coming to the landing. But recall, more than 50% of Minnesota anglers reported they don't believe angling gear can move aquatic invasive species among water bodies. Also recall from Angel's work, no one found the spiny water flea planted on a fishing rod. This actually might become important for messaging opportunities. Work in Illinois reported that self-efficacy was the strongest predictor of behavior to stop the spread of AIS on boats, meaning that boaters were more confident, as boaters were more confident in their ability to complete the remove, drain, dry behaviors that they advocate, they were more likely to do so. However, response efficacy was the strongest predictor of fishing equipment, meaning that as anglers became more convinced that their behavior would make a difference, they were more likely to take action on the equipment. Another consideration is timing. We observed folks were on the landing for about 7 minutes, and we know from other surveys that boaters indicate they would be willing to clean 15 and even up to 30 minutes. Therefore, there is more time to do things, and they are willing to do things. So some messaging around that might be opportunistic. We remain with some questions about where to target our messaging. There are a lot of pieces here to examine, and we welcome your ideas on that, and we definitely need more information, which is what's going to roll into our next phase and those focus groups. So as we continue our analysis on the observations, we're also starting into some focus groups. And these are going to occur among those who fish via boat in the regions where we observed the Metro and then in the Northwest. Participants are being recruited through partners and social media with invitations to complete a screening questionnaire that confirms their fishing locations, assesses their experience and knowledge of AIS and prevention behaviors. Based on these items, we're segmenting potential respondents into high and lower AIS risk groups. where those with less knowledge, completing fewer behaviors, and fishing on more water bodies will be characterized as higher risk. So for each region, we are planning to conduct online focus groups with up to 12 participants in the higher risk and lower risk segments. We've got trained facilitators to guide the group discussion, and thematic data analysis will identify benefits and constraints to performing them, emphasizing the least frequently performed in our observations and those of highest concern. Field notes, recordings, dual data coders, and member checking will work toward trustworthy focus group data. And then following the focus groups, we will develop and refine our messages, test them among both experts and then our target group, and share our results and best practices. So recall our hypothesis includes that as message medium engagement increases, intentions to perform AIS prevention behaviors will increase. And based on our findings, the team are going to develop and disseminate recommendations for the most effective messaging in concert with our partners. Further, building on these results and those in progress, AR's influence on acceptance of various AIS managed approaches could be tested, and we might also be able to move into the AIS gaming world if this is effective. But regardless of our results, and if we need to go beyond the sign, statewide AIS communication efforts will be more informed and effective to measurably reduce AIS spread. So thank you so much for your time today, and thank you to our amazing advisory committee and our observers and data assistants. We look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. We have one question here, and I'll read out loud. Was there a difference between the boaters at Centerville, Pelletier versus Ida Reno when cleaning off their boats? Metro boaters versus rural area boaters?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we haven't done that analysis yet. We just got our observations done August 30th, so it was a feat to get this all put together, quite frankly, but that is definitely something we're interested in comparing for sure. Thanks for the question, and we'll be sharing those as soon as we can.
All right, we got another question here from Joe. Joe says, you report that our above average Lake Wobegon anglers really don't do as much as they say. Can we get the summary data points that you spoke about where what anglers say doesn't match what they do?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, sure. So you report that the above average Lake Wobegon anglers really don't do as much as they say. Can we get those summary data points that you spoke about where what anglers say does not match their behavior?
Yeah, I guess I was referring that we say we're doing more than some of the others in the region. So that was that comment. And then in terms of what they say they do and what they actually do, it's actually pretty close from the observation that we found, I guess, at least in my initial perspective of it. So we've got like 80% who are removing the vegetation. I think it was 78% who did. 80% who said they're removing their drain plug, and we saw like 74%. So that was similar. So I'm going back to, yeah. So I'm sorry if that was confusing or if I'm further confusing things.
We have another question here. It says, what about live bait disposal?
Yeah, great question. We did not tackle the live bait issue. We had quite a few conversations about doing that, but based on the challenges of that disposal, we did not work on that in this project. Certainly would be a great effort and a great research project.
We have another question here that says, why not test the idea that a big fine or loss of your boat will help with behavior? Education is good. They say they all know about AIS, but yet behavior hasn't changed. Would real consequences make a difference?
I imagine that they probably would, yes. And I know that there are some efforts out there to do that. Um, that's just not this project. It doesn't mean that we couldn't include some of the questions in the survey that we'll be putting together. So what's happening is we're doing focus groups and then we're creating a questionnaire. And the primary emphasis will be on, testing these messages static versus more engaging in the AR. But we certainly could include something like that. We do know, and maybe those of you who saw some of the other presentations here at the showcase, people say they're willing to pay for AIS management efforts. And so maybe some of that money could go toward some other consequences or funding more enforcement.
We have another question here. It says, do you expect your messaging to focus on at the launch messaging techniques or more broad-based messaging, for example, brochures, licensed material, etc.?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Well, since anglers say that they like messaging at the point of entry, but not necessarily signs, it certainly makes sense to do it there. We have talked about a few different options, and I think we'll know more once the focus groups are done. But for example, we've talked about, is there something that we could send with anglers that would have a QR code that might inspire them to act, like some sort of bobber or floater. We talked about a little boat. Could we get little QR codes on a little boat to show places where you should clean? So we welcome ideas for sure, but I don't anticipate it will be much of the print at this point.
And what, if anything, surprised you about these findings?
Yeah, I'd say just the time people spent or did not spend was a little surprising to me. I thought people would spend more time. I'm really not sure how much you can do in 1 or 2 minutes or even 7 minutes with hand removal, because there were no tools here. There was no spraying or anything. So that was surprising to me and a little disappointing in terms of how many people, spent little time.
One more question here. Did you consider choosing lakes that usually have inspectors present, but would not be present on the day your data collectors were there?
Oh, yeah. So thanks for that clarifying question. Our lakes occasionally did have inspectors, but we were not there on the days that inspectors were. And if some scheduling snafu happened, we would leave. So yes, there were occasionally inspectors, or even more frequently inspectors at these lakes, but not always. So it was really difficult to find comparable lakes with a little signage. So I guess that's a kudos to people for all the things that they're doing in terms of site redesigns and so forth and equipment. But yeah, we thought we had it down, and it was a good challenge for us. But one of my graduate students is thinking about doing some comparisons of launches by different designs and with different cleaning things in the next year. So kind of building on this work. So we might learn something there. And I also have an undergraduate student who simultaneously observed if people were entering with their drain plugs in, and is in the process of analyzing that data.
Thank you. We've got a comment here from Doug Jensen from the Minnesota DNR. And Doug says, to address the motivations question concerning laws and fines, several Minnesota surveys showed an increase of 55% to over 90% among recreational boaters and anglers from 1994 to 2013. Thanks for that, Doug. We have a question here that says, it would be interesting to know if the people not cleaning their boats were maybe just using that lake only.
Yes, that's a possibility for sure, but the transport, and if they're leaving the launch, still would be an issue.
We have another question here that says, how much time or days did you spend at each boat landing?
Yeah, we had a slide there, so I can go back to that. So we had a total of 166 hours with a range of hours at each landing between 28 and 62. We had paid observers in the metro, so that's probably why we had a few more opportunities to be out there and have more data.
We have time for just a few more questions. So if you have your questions, I'd encourage you to get them in now. Do you think making tools available at landings would increase cleaning boats?
Well, when surveyed, that was something that the anglers suggest and voters suggested would be useful and certainly could increase the boat cleaning.
And our final question, unless anybody has anything else, it appears that the approach you mentioned, augmented reality, is more compatible to a younger demographic. Is a younger demographic your target audience?
Thank you for that question. So we are not targeting a younger demographic specifically. Smartphone ownership is slightly higher among those under 65, and the knowledge of augmented reality is also lower among the older groups. However, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, these new participants in outdoor recreation and angling in particular are younger and more socially connected. And I forget where it was. I think it was the Outdoor Industry Association report as well. It might have been a Minnesota report speaking to how our older anglers will be aging out. And so this forthcoming group will be more connected. So it would definitely be useful for the emerging majority of anglers that is in the future.